All right, so we ready for this?
I am as ready as I will ever be.
All right.
Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You are about to listen to the Totally Super Awesome 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast.
This podcast is our fan tribute to the Incredible Hulk TV show. Be advised that has been exposed to radiation and we caution to listen at your own risk. You have now entered GammaCast.
This is GammaCast. I am Dave, and online I've got co-host Charlie.
Hello, it is me, Charlie. Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
And today we are going to be talking about Killer Instinct. This is episode 8 of season 2. Director is Ray Doughton. Writers William Whitehead, Joel Don Humphreys. Original air date was November 10th, 1978. The alias that David is using is David Burnett. Our synopsis is David takes a job working as an assistant trainer for a professional football team in order to learn more about the research of a sports psychologist studying abnormal aggression in football players. The main co-star that was in this episode is a guy named Denny Miller as John Toby. And for those of you that were fans of a TV show called Wagon Train, which I never watched, but he was Duke Shannon in that one from 1961 through 1964. But I thought I'd give a good shout out to that.
Yeah, that was actually where Clint Eastwood got his start.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah. Fun bits of Wagon Train.
Yes.
Back when cowboys were a thing.
So now Killer Instinct, the episode itself, I applaud what they were doing because they're trying to get into the, yet another sports related episode. But football just isn't my thing. So, I understand what they're trying to convey with the episode, and it was kind of fun around the, he wants to see what this psychologist is doing towards studying aggression. And I think that was all well and good, but just, the stock footage of, which was actually the Chicago Bears, which is kind of fun.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think they called them the Los Angeles Cougars, right? Was that right? The Los Angeles Cougars.
Cougars did not have another connotation.
Right.
It's interesting that you should actually highlight the football because actually, for me, what this episode was sort of a counter note to what we saw with the concept of hypnosis and meditation in the pilot. To put it simply, in the pilot, it shows the power of hypnosis and this idea of, which is a very comic book ideal, this idea that, the human mind can be unlocked and manipulated in such a almost mechanical way. And to have in this episode, basically showing the downside of that. It's very much of that, early 80s, late 70s idea, understanding of the science of hypnosis. But as well, I think it's an attempt in its own way to address, what I think is a constant question within the Incredible Hulk universe, which is that if you were close with this idea, why didn't you pursue it further? And here we see him pursuing this idea further, this idea of hypnosis, this idea of, understanding the aggressive impulse, and then seeing how it can both go completely south, and then how even its manipulation can be, quite frankly, unethical.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that's a great point because it was really deep diving into the aspects of the psychologist that was doing the study of Toby in the episode and not taking it far enough because he was only going so far because he didn't his motivation wasn't necessarily to stop that aggression but act like he was studying it. But he had the motivation of keeping him going the way he was because he was the star.
well, exactly, and in that it's exactly the opposite idea that Banner's approaching. Banner's saying, "How can we find aggression and end it?" And
Right,
this guy is saying, "No, there's a lot of money in aggression."
right.
There is, and that is in its own way the crux of the episode is, I worked hard, I got this money, I am doing aggression research based on the research of Banner, and they do name check again a scientist who name checks Banner, but has no idea what the man looks like. Thank you, pre-internet era. Um, which
And we did talk about that before, right? So it's
yeah,
like,
well, yeah. Well, yeah, because but again, it is that time capsule of what we're talking about. We're talking about this point in history where you you didn't have the internet in your pocket. Right now, my son is playing on my phone because his Kindle has run out of power, and the entire universe is literally in his hands right now. He can look up any bit of knowledge that you can imagine, and he can find an answer for you. And that is the world we live in today. The world not 30 years ago was a completely different place.
right.
One generation and the entire world has changed, which is always the most amazing thing to me about watching these shows. Is just how different things are and how easy it was to be a writer back then. Because you look at these things and say, man, you could never do that nowadays. You could never have that plot line. Because now every single episode, you can look for the No Bars supercut on YouTube, and you will find like 6 of them, and it's just cut after cut of everyone saying, "We've got no bars. We have no bars," saying we cannot connect. And eventually Motorola is going to make the satellite phone the business standard. Buy Motorola stock if you're in that business. You want to buy things, buy Motorola. They actually are the leader in satellite phones. Satellite phones will eventually make that a completely useless thing. You are not going to be able to say no bars unless you are literally buried underneath the earth. So stock tip from Charlie by Motorola. We'll see if
And
that actually
well,
comes
as we know from the Matrix, we will be underneath the Earth. But anyway,
up.
we
Yes,
digress. Anyway,
we
uh, going back on topic of the episode, David is working for the football team. He's like an assistant aide kind of a thing. Helping wrap up, players, their ankles or whatever it is, the injuries. But he's doing that because he's trying to get close to the psychologist because he knows the psychologist is doing aggression studying, and so he's part of this. This organization because he's trying to learn, the what this guy is doing. We have this player named John Toby who is very aggressive and the star of the football team and really you know constantly looking to tackle the other team's quarterback and all that kind of good stuff. And so he's um, the psychologist is studying John Toby, and at the same time, David is befriending John Toby, and then noticing these traits with John Toby, with him being overly aggressive, and he asked permission to sit in with the hypnosis sessions, and then that's kind of where we get where we have some involvement with David watching what's going on with these sessions. And, as we were alluding to, the psychologist is taking it up to a certain level, but not going all the way because he doesn't necessarily have the motivation to stop John
Well, I
Toby's
think,
aggression.
yeah, I think what's more to the point in this is that he's unlocking the aggression, which is what he's trying to do. However, when he, he's basically looking to unlock something, but he's not really considering what unlocking it even means. And again, compared to this, there's a really good scene when we get one of our Hulk outs in here, where the other players know that Banner's causing problems for the team.
And that's exactly what I was getting to, is the point where David is talking to the psychologist and talking to the psychologist, basically saying, hey, you should pull John Toby, have him take a break. He needs a break because he's just overly aggressive. And the other two players overhear this. And then this leads to what you were just talking about, Charlie.
Yeah. And this is the thing, when the psychologist then comes down to view the damage and they see the pillar that's been taken out. And okay, like just for me, when that pillar gets taken out, that was an issue, because that's clearly a load-bearing pillar. You don't put a pillar in the middle of a locker room for decoration. That's a load-bearing pillar. There should have been far more damage caused by it when that gets taken out. But aside from that, but you can always argue whether there are multiple load-bearing pillars, and yes, that's a problem that one was taken out, but in and of itself, one taken out isn't going to cause the whole structure to collapse. So I can go with that. But when the psychologist looks at it, he's like, "Whoa, wow, that's impressive." With a complete disconnect from the danger that puts people in, that we've unleashed this thing. Because of course, and much like Banner in the first episode, he wants to unlock the secret strengths that all humans have, but never once takes a moment to say, well, wait, if we unleash these strengths, what is that going to mean for everything else? Is that going to be problematic for the world that we've unleashed Hulks? But he's not even thinking that far ahead. He's thinking about his individual experiment, his individual grant. When it falls apart, he's not even thinking that, oh, that's a problem. He's thinking, oh, hey, how cool that we've unlocked this thing, that something has come through,
Right.
It was very, very, very interesting in that approach to how a scientist approaches things. Because again, it is this idea that when a scientist looks at something, they're actually looking at not the grander scheme of how their discovery fits into the universe. They're looking at their discovery. And for what it's worth, I'm sure the psychiatrist is looking at that and saying, oh, this is one of my guys who did this. I unlocked this aggression. I unlocked this strength. That's awesome. Not even realizing that it was actually, because he doesn't know Banner from Adam, and he doesn't know what other factors are going in here, which of course goes into the crux of the central argument. He doesn't know. He's just unleashing the anger in Toby. He's not really thinking about what is the crux of that anger, which allows Banner to then say, look, his core anger is related to his father, who has passed away. So he can never address that anger. But of course, to the psychiatrist, he's like, I don't care. I'm paid to find that anger. My job is to find what you're angry about and let you use that on the field.
Right.
And of course, that's honestly, from a science point of view, this was really this is a very intellectual episode, I think. For an episode about football, it's actually a very intellectual episode. Bad B footage aside. For what it's worth, I do think a couple of times they actually had Toby being played by an African American football player.
Oh, from the stock footage, yeah.
Yeah, for the stock footage, like, it's number 13. He's like, ooh, wait a minute, his arms weren't that tan in the previous scene.
But going back to the Hulk out number 1, I just the other players actually were taunting David by doing the towel snaps at him. So I thought that was kind of humorous. And then they lock him into the steam room, and then you get to see their faces, and then the next thing you knew, you see the Hulk. He hulks out, and then you get their reaction as they're looking at him into the steam room and seeing this very sweaty Hulk, which was really kind of a funny scene. And then he reaches through and then grabs them and then like tosses them back, and then we get to actually see sweaty Hulk in those short shorts, which is something which was something new that we hadn't seen in previous episodes, because normally it looks like he's got on capris on. But now he's got shorts on, so it was really kind of funny.
That is actually straight from the comics right there, quite frankly, the shorts. Because as the Hulk has been around, he has worn expandable undergarments over the years. He has realized the problem, and he started to wear basically purple shorts that he could wear. And here we do see that, where it's that spandex, that lycra fabric that does stretch, and so it works out good for the Hulk on this. Again, we get this very interesting point where it's this weird tropey thing of everyone sees the Hulk come out, but no one remembers the Banner going in. And it's this thing that in a modern show you would absolutely hang a lampshade on. You would have someone say, well, no one considers this because it is such a separate from reality perspective. So when you throw Banner into the steam room and then the Hulk come out of the steam room, nobody thinks Banner turns into the Hulk. They just think,
this big green guy showed up, right?
And when Banner doesn't show up later, they say, "Oh, well, he must have gotten out when the Hulk showed up." And it's something that in a modern show you would hang a lampshade on. You would say, but it's an interesting question. I've done a couple game shows over the years. And one thing I've always noticed on game shows, it's a lot more stressful in that moment, whether there's money on the line or not. Because I did a game show on NPR where there was no money on the line, but just my own vanity on the line. And in that moment, the stress makes your brain shut down. You're not thinking as complexly as you would if you were sitting at home or sitting in the car listening to the radio. And I do wonder if there is this if there's this unspoken thing here where, yes, in that moment, nobody even considers that Banner could be the Hulk. Because when they see this happen, all they see is the Hulk. And they're in that moment and they say, no, I saw a Hulk. A Hulk burst out of that steam room. That's what occurred. And no one's going to say, no, there was this other guy we threw in. They're going to say, no. And first, among other things, no one ever wants to admit, yeah, we were beating the hell out of this guy, threw him into that stock room, and then, this monster came out. They're all just going to say, no, a monster came out of the stock room. No one's actually going to admit to the little guy they were beating up before that. But in their own minds, I think that there is this disconnect, because in that moment, in that second, no one is going to see what is going on. They're just seeing that moment, that second, and the exact moment that they exist. If the stress of a game show for no money, it was Ask Me Another on NPR. I was on it. And they actually replay it on like the really hard episodes. Like this was a game that we did that nobody could get an answer to. I'm on that one, and I failed miserably. Look it up, kids. Yeah, and I'm usually very smart, as some people will even say. But in that moment, you're just completely, and honestly, they cut it to make me sound way more intelligent. When I was up there and I'm talking, I'm like, duh, the whole time. I don't even know what they're talking to me about my own life. And I'm like, oh, that's what they were referencing. Okay. Like later, I'm like, oh, yeah. So in that moment, I'm sure those people who threw Banner into the steam room aren't even thinking about Banner, because all they saw was a guy come out that basically tossed them like rag dolls, smashed through a solid concrete load-bearing column, and then just walked away.
Yeah, and it was like they were trying to convince the coach afterwards that, about the Hulk, and they were like, no, you guys were just juicing, and then he believes that they caused the damage to the locker room. So, all of that kind of happens, and then where do we go from there? We got let's see, Donut goes to see, and then Toby goes to visit a player that he had hurt, and he tries to cheer up the player. The player accuses Toby of intentionally hurting him. And then Toby is kind of shaken up by that. He talks to David for help. And then, David, I think, tries to, kind of reassure him and tell him that he needs to rest. And then at the same time, this is where he's trying to get him benched. And then his wife gets involved and asks him to get involved. And then that's when David starts to discover that, his father was involved in earlier, causing cheating when he was practicing and playing with him as a boy, and then causing him to be, to cause why he was doing this. At this time, I believe it's the coach or the psychologist that basically had said, David, you're out. You're not going to be in this anymore. If I'm remembering the episode right.
No, I mean that's about it. I mean, like, the crux of the conflict between Banner and the psychologist on that is, that the psychologist doesn't see anything wrong. Actually, what I wanted to talk about is like when Toby goes to talk to the player, that's the player whose position he has taken. So basically, Toby was second string. This guy was first string in the scrimmage at the very start. He basically breaks the guy's leg, so he's out of the playoffs.
Right.
And so from his perspective, Toby's just a guy who wants the top spot, and since he didn't earn it, he's just gonna basically be overly aggressive in this moment. And of course, that's the crux of it. Is this guy can't control his aggression because years and years ago, and this I think goes back to the Child in Need episode. This idea that years and years ago, someone dealt with this character poorly, and now the character is so influenced by this in a way that they don't even comprehend. I mean, it's a very interesting Freudian take on mental health, because it is all about the unconscious. It is all about the things you don't even know you know, and that's an interesting thing, because of course the injured player absolutely says, no, you took me out because you wanted my spot. And the other guy's like, no, man, I don't even know why I did that. I don't understand why I'm being this violent, which is again goes back to this the scientific ethics of what the hypnotist is doing. To that extent, one can actually argue that that in this universe, within this continuity, David actually had the higher scientific ethics, exposing himself to gamma rays, because in that he only puts himself at risk, not everybody else. When the hypnotist starts saying, everyone starts saying, "Oh, this guy's aggressive, cut him out." He says, "Fine, he's out of my study. I'm not going to deal with him anymore. He's no longer a dot in my matrix." Then basically he abandons this guy to his own unbridled, essentially mental illness that was caused by the hypnotist, which of course leads to what happens at the end of the episode.
Right. And so what I was getting to is that then David's no longer part of the assistant team. So he's trying to get back into the game because he really feels that Toby is in a vulnerable position where he's going to actually kill the other quarterback. So he wants to get in there to stop that from happening. And so security is not letting him through. He first tries to get tickets from a scalper, doesn't have enough money. He ends up jumping the gate. He gets caught, and then he gets locked into the drunk tank during the game. And then the whole time that he's trying to get free to get to the field so that he can stop Toby, everyone else is gathered around a little transistor radio that they have, and they're shouting, "Toby, Toby, Toby," because everybody's all excited. They want him to be the aggressive player that he is. It's very reminiscent of the Gladiator days. Um, yeah, and so you had that moment, and then David trying to help, trying to get to the field. The aggression starts. They actually throw a metal bowl at him, and that causes him to Hulk out. He hulks out, breaks out of the pen, runs down to the field, actually grabs Toby and carries him as if he was a football to the end of the field line, and which is very comical. And then, once the other players start to, come to him, he actually bends the goalpost down to stop them, and they actually have Toby and him just do this little exchange where Toby's able to work out his aggression against the Hulk. So at that moment, it was very much like A Child in Need, where we had the aggression, being worked out, against the Hulk, and then him remembering his father, causing him feeling like his father was a cheater and not being able to stop his father. And so he was in that kid moment again, and the Hulk being, like his father. And same way it was with A Child in Need, where it was the abuser being, confronting his abuser. So that's kind of the moment that we had with that,
which was very nice story wise. I do wonder. I mean, I'm not going to wonder. I actually will state that it was not particularly accurate psychologically. Although, actually, I'm glad, now that I think about it, I did want to raise an issue with Child in Need. Just because we did get that call out from our listener last time with regard to it. I did rewatch the episode. There is no statement by Banner that the abuser had a neurological issue. What was at issue was a psychological issue. And they do state that the abuser is in the hospital. Although it's important to note that the timing of this episode is pre-80s. It is pre the Reagan era and deinstitutionalization. And that is actually a very big historical point. Nowadays, in post-institutionalization America, when someone has a psychological issue and causes a crime, they go to jail, where they receive little to no treatment and essentially become criminals. In pre-80s, pre-Reagan era, you actually had an established psychological system in place that was not perfect by any means and actually resulted in many people who were not I don't want to say truly mentally ill, but who did not need institutionalization, being forced into institutions and unable to exit those institutions because of the caprices of the doctors in charge of those institutions. This is, of course, most famously depicted in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and of course had a very real-world moment in the Greystone scandal in New Jersey, which led to the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill. But in this moment, you're in this kind of sweet spot here where everything that David says is accurate, that the father has gone to a hospital, he will receive treatment, and he will hopefully be discharged soon. Although, truth be told, how much he gets discharged is going to be reliant on how much he accepts of his own fault in what we get. But there is not an actual neurological as opposed to psychological concern here. Neurological would imply PTSD or more likely a closed head trauma caused by some physical altercation, perhaps even some event that had happened to him earlier, possibly the previous abuse. But in the context of what we're actually given is the psychological component of this person had a mental illness brought about by his PTSD from his father's abuse. And as such, he was sent to a hospital because this is in pre-deinstitutionalization America, where in a sad version of the story, he never gets let out. In a happy version of the story, he gets let out in a few weeks, and he's, doing what he needs to do. He's taking his lithium. He's balanced, and he's going to a doctor to talk about his own pain.
You just could not wait to follow up with Tristan.
Well, I didn't want to forget that because I said I would. I said I would rewatch it, and I did. I honestly, this is a great episode because this is a bookend episode, I feel, to the Child in Need episode, where in its own way, it actually highlights the problems with the hyper-institutionalized world of the pre-Reagan era, of these doctors who are only interested in their assessment of clients, not necessarily of the curing of clients. It's and of course, it's that obvious point, which isn't. I mean, it's not directly related, but as the doctor says, my grants are based on this study. For those who are institutionalized, their grants are based on people being institutionalized. And of course, as a counter argument within that perspective, if someone gets let out and then they go on to kill their child or their wife, then that doctor is responsible. Because they said they were fine, and no, they weren't fine yet. They weren't ready to go back out into the world. So you do have this complex milieu that eventually led to the deinstitutionalization under Reagan. And the Congress, because you should never say under Reagan, because it's Reagan and the Congress, which was Tip O'Neill at that time. So it's not like anything gets done unipartilaterally in this country. Everything is always done because there is enough interest from both sides to push something forward. And it usually falls apart shortly thereafter because the people that wanted to have a break put into it to make sure that things didn't go off the rails don't get in the next election. And so, it gets complex. But anyway, I do feel that.
Yeah, to wrap up the episode, after Toby has a situation with the Hulk, and the all of a sudden the Hulk realizes that he has all the crowd around him. He runs out of the stadium. The next time we see David, he is playing Army Men with John Toby, and we find out that they had lost the playoff game, but he will be getting treatment, and he'll get to play again the following season. So, this is a nice little ending to the episode before David, decides that he's got to take off, as he normally does after, he's had a very public hulking out. So that's kind of where the episode ends, after, and David leaves, and then we get the Lonely Man theme. So that was our football episode.
Yes. I'd call it the second hypnosis episode, but yes, I mean, football was the medium in which they addressed this issue.
Well, that's where they had the stock footage ready to go for that.
Exactly.
So they had
that.
We have this available, so we'll use this.
Yeah, the whole series is about what does Universal have handy this week. It's like, oh, we've got football. We'll write a football episode. We got a Demolition Derby. We'll write a Demolition Derby episode. Okay, we're on it.
So then, what are your final thoughts on this episode, Killer Instinct?
Well, my final thoughts are that it was actually a really good episode. I actually felt they addressed things that were existing in this universe. And this is one of these episodes that makes me wonder, are the writers really considering past episodes when they're writing these things? Or are they writing piecemeal without concern? And I do think this is one of the episodes which you can hold up and say, the writers do understand this is an arc, this is a story. What happened before is connected to what happens next, and we're not going to ignore that. We're not going to eliminate that just because it's more convenient for us as a story. So I like this episode.
Yeah, for me, the episode wasn't so strong, and it could be because of the theme that they had it with with the football theme. But I mean, I didn't really have Jack McGee moment in there. I do understand that he was doing his best to try to pursue a cure, but kind of the Hulk out moments just seemed kind of weak to me. You had two football players snapping him with wet towels, and then putting him in a steam room. That just seemed kind of weak. And then, he's in the pen with the holding pen and gets hit with a metal bowl. I mean, it just seemed, those moments seemed kind of weak for him to get, aggressive and being a Hulk. But I get, once again, if I get to the point where I'm at the mindset where, we don't need a superhero moment, and I understand just the dramatic element story that's going on, I'm more forgiving of it. But if for some reason this one just didn't play well with me, and I'm just not big a fan of it as you are.
Well, what I'll say about any Hulk out moment is and this is something we brought up last episode with, Alice in Discoland, is that the hulking, what causes the Hulk out moment, and you're even going to get this all throughout it, because I've actually watched a couple episodes ahead. What causes a Hulk out moment is always going to be very capricious, to the point that I do wonder when I go back to that Alice in Discoland and we see Banner essentially smashing himself against stuff. If there is this aspect of the Hulk, of Banner, of wanting to release the Hulk, that the Hulk is under much more control of Banner than Banner wants to admit. And so he doesn't Hulk out just because somebody punched him, or just because he hurt his hand, or just because whatever happened. He hulks out when Banner wants to let it go. And I do think that you do get some of this there. And with the towel snapping, I do think there's actually a very interesting point in there, in this sense that this is a very Banner as a science kid, probably a nerdy kid in high school, probably has had bullies snap him with towels in the past. And so I did feel that was a very interesting take on things about the towel snapping, and how, especially when we're thinking about the central theme of the buried emotional pain of losing a game to your father because he cheated, how that buried emotional pain might be informing the way Banner hulks out. So,
but see, that's you putting your own headcanon spin into it, because I could make the argument that the Bill Bixby, debonair guy that he is, maybe he was the same way in high school, and he was popular in high school. Probably he was the smart, charming, good-looking kid.
Yes.
So I can make that argument too. And, so in my headspace, this particular episode, I guess I just really didn't buy into the story as much as you did.
No. And you were absolutely right in that the headcanon is her own take on it. And it,
right.
What I'll say is it comes down to whether or not you want the headcanon to work or you don't. So if you want the headcanon to work, you make it say, okay, so this is actually important because of this and this and this and this. And if you say, no, if you're coming to it from a negative perspective, young man, then yes, the cup is half empty, and towel snapping is not a trigger for Bruce Banner.
Right.
If you come in from the cup half full perspective, then yes, it's a PTSD trigger for Banner as well.
I'll do my best to be more positive. All right. I think that's a great way to end. So, Charlie, social media credentials.
Well, social media credentials is someday I will get back to live tweeting The Incredible Hulk on main TV at 7 o'clock Eastern on Saturdays, when I don't have 10 other things to do on my Saturday. You can follow along with me at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEsser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. And of course, you can always write to me about anything Incredible Hulk or comic book related that you want to talk about at Charlie Esser. That's at superconnectivityblog at gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog at gmail.com.
All right, so I'm Dave. Take care of our 80s Reboot Overdrive accounts. That's 80sreboot.tumblr.com, facebook.com/80sreboot. We also have a blog. That's southgatemediagroup.com/80srebootblog. Also, if you want to shoot us an email, as we have in the past gotten an email from Tristan, which Charlie was talking about, that 80sreboot@gmail.com. We definitely want to hear your feedback on these episodes, and we'd love to discuss that feedback and debate back and forth about it. So with that, we appreciate you hulking out with us, and have a good night.
Good night.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.